Hi, I'm Robin Hubbard. I'm a member of the UUMH in Chatham, and I'm really thrilled to be able to read part of this wonderful novel to you. Growing up as a kid, my mother read it to us every year at Christmas. So I'm going to read Stave 3, the second of the three spirits. I get to introduce him to you. Awakening in the middle of the prodigious tough snore, and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was again upon the stroke of 1. He felt that he was restored to consciousness in the right nick of time, for the especial purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger dispatched to him through Jacob Marley's intervention. But finding that he turned uncomfortably cold when he began to wonder which of his curtains this new spectre would draw back, he put them every one aside with his own hand, and lying down again, established a good lookout all around his bed, for he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of its appearance, and did not wish to be taken by surprise and made nervous. Gentlemen of the free and easy sort, who plumed themselves with being acquainted with a move or two, and being usually equal to the time of day, expressed to a wide range of their capacity for adventure by observing that they are good for anything from pitch and toss to manslaughter. Being which opposite extremes, no doubt, there lies a tolerably wide and comprehensive range of subjects. Without venturing for Scrooge quite as hardly as this, I don't mind calling on you to believe that he was ready for the good broad field of strange appearances, and that nothing between a baby and a rhinoceros would have astonished him very much. Now, being prepared for almost anything, he was not by any means prepared for nothing. And consequently, when the bell struck 1 and no shape appeared, he was taken with violent fit of trembling. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by, and yet nothing came. All this time he lay upon his bed, the very core and center of a blaze of ruddy light, which streamed upon it when the clock proclaimed the hour, and which, being only light, was more alarming than a dozen ghosts, as he was powerless to make out what it meant, or would be at, and was sometimes apprehensive that he might be at the very moment on the interesting case of spontaneous combustion, without having the consolation of knowing it. At last, however, he began to think, as you or I would have thought at first, for it is always a person not in the predicament who knows what ought to have been done in it, and would unquestionably have done it too. At least, I say, he began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room, from whence, on further tracing, it seemed to shine. This idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the lock, a strange voice called to him by name and bade him enter. He obeyed. It was his own room. There was no doubt about that, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceilings were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove, from every part of which bright, gleamy berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there. And such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that dull petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or in Marley's, or for many, many a winter season gone. Heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, suckling pigs, long wreaths of sausage. I love that, long wreaths of sausages. Mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes. I can't find out what a 12th cake is. This is an interesting thing. I looked it up. 12th cake, it must be like a fruit cake or something that they had back in those days in England. And seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. In easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to be seen, who bore a glowing torch in the shape not unlike a plenty's horn, and he held it up high up to shed the light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door. "Come in," exclaimed the ghost. "Come in and know me better, man." Scrooge entered timidly and hung his head before the spirit. He was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them. "I am the ghost of Christmas present," said the spirit. "Look upon me." Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple deep green robe or mantle bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breasts were bare, and as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by any artifice. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath, set here and there with shiny icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eyes, its open hand, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanor, and its joyful air. Girded around its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. You have never seen the likes of me before," exclaimed the spirit. "Never," Scrooge made answer to it. "Have never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning, for I am very young, my elder brothers born in these later years?" pursued the phantom. "I don't think I have," said Scrooge. "I am afraid I have not. Have you many brothers, spirit?" "More than 1,800, said the ghost. "A tremendous family to provide for," muttered Scrooge. The ghost of Christmas present rose. "Spirit," said Scrooge submissively, "conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learned a lesson which is working now. Tonight you have but aught to teach me. Let me profit by it." "Touch my robe." Scrooge did so as he was told, and held it fast. Holly, mistletoe, red berries, ivy, turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, meat, pigs, sausages, oysters, pies, puddings, fruit, and punch all vanished instantly. So did the room, the fire, the ruddy glow, the hour of the night, and they stood in the city street on Christmas morning, where, for the weather was severe, the people made a rough but brisk and not unpleasant kind of music in scraping the snow from the pavement in front of their dwellings and from the tops of their houses, whence it was mad delight to the boys to see if it could come plumbing down into the road below and splitting into artificial little snowstorms. The house fronts looked black enough, and the windows blacker, contrasting with the smooth white sheets of snow upon the roof and with the dirtier snow upon the ground, which last deposited had been plowed up in deep furrows by the heavy-wheeled carts and wagons, furrows that crossed and recrossed each other's hundreds of times, where the great streets branched off and made intricate channels, hard to trace, in the thick yellow mud and icy water. Ooh, they didn't have snowplows in those days. The sky was gloomy, and the shortest streets were choked with dingy mist, half thawed, half frozen, whose heavier particles descended in a shower of snooty atoms, as if all the chimneys in Great Britain had, by one consent, caught fire and were blazing away to their dearest heart's content. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad that the clearest summer air and the brightest summer sun might have endeavored to diffuse in vain. For the people who were shoveling away on the housetops were jovial and full of glee, calling out to one another from the parapets, and now and then exchanging a facetious snowball, better-natured missile far more than many a wordy jest, laughing heartily as if it went right, and not less heartily if it went wrong. The poulterer's shop is where you go to get your chickens and geese and turkeys, were still half open, and the fruiterers were radiant in their glory. There were great round pot-belly baskets of chestnuts, shaped like the waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen, lolling at the doors and tumbling out into the street with their apoplectic opulence. That's a hard thing to say, apoplectic opulence, but that's how it is. That means lots and lots. There were ruddy, brown-faced, broad-girthed Spanish onions shining in the fatness of their growth like Spanish friars, and winking from their shelves in wanton slyness at the girls as they went by, and glanced demurely at the hung-up mistletoe. There were pears and apples clustered high in blooming pyramids. There were bunches of grapes made into the shopkeeper's benevolence to dangle from the conspicuous hooks that made that people's mouths might water gratis as they passed. There were piles of filberts, mossy and brown, recalling in their fragrance ancient walks along the woods and pleasant shuffling ankle-deep through withered leaves. There were Norfolk buffin, squab, and swarthy. I tried to find out, this is a side note here, I was trying to find out what a Norfolk buffin was, and I think it was like a small bird, but I can't tell you because I couldn't find a definition, but I'm picturing it like a little bird. Anyway, there were Norfolk buffins, squab and swarthy, setting off the yellow of the oranges and the lemons, and in the great compactness of their juicy persons, and urgently entreating and beseeching to be carried home in paper bags and eaten after dinner. The very gold and silver fish set forth among these choice fruits in a bowl, though members of a dull and stagnant-blooded race, appeared to know that there was something going on, and to a fish went gasping round and round in their little world in slow and passionless excitement. The grocers, nearly closed, with perhaps 2 shutters down or 1, but through those gaps, such glimpses, it was not alone that the scales descended on the counter, made a merry sound, or that the twine and the roller parted company so briskly, or that the canisters were rattled up and down like juggling tricks, or even that the blended scents of tea and coffee were so grateful to the nose, or even that the raisins were so plentiful and rare, the almonds so extremely white, the sticks of cinnamon so long and straight, and the other spices so delicious, the candied fruits so caked and spotted with molten sugar as to make the coldest onlookers feel faint and subsequently bilious. That means they felt sick to their stomach after a while. Nor was it that the figs were moist and pulpy, or that the French plums blushed in modest tartness from their highly decorated boxes, or that everything was good to eat and in its Christmas dress. But the customers were all so hurried and so eager in the hopeful promises of the day that they tumbled up against each other at the door, crashing their wicker baskets wildly, and left their purchases upon the counter, and then came rushing back in to fetch them, and committed hundreds of like mistakes in the best of humor possible. And while the grocer and his people were so frank and fresh that the polished hearts with which they fastened their aprons behind might have been their own, worn outside for general inspection, and for the Christmas dolls to peck at as they chose. But soon the steeples called people all to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes and with their gayest faces. And at the same time there emerged from scores of by-streets, lanes, and nameless turnings, innumerable people carrying their dinners to the baker's shop. Just a little note in here. It used to be people didn't have ovens in their houses, so if they had something to roast like a turkey, they would take it to the bakers, and the bakers would put them in their oven. That even used to happen here on Cape Cod. So it's just something that's changed in the last 100 years. The sight of the poor revelers appeared to interest the spirit very much, for he stood with Scrooge beside him in the baker's doorway, and taking off the cover as their bearers passed, sprinkled incense on their dinners from his torch. And it was a very uncommon kind of torch, for once or twice, when there were angry words between some dinner carriers who had just jostled each other, he shed a few drops of water on them, and from it, and their good humor was restored directly. And for they said, "It was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day," and so it was. God love it, so it was. In time the bells ceased and the bakeries were shut, and yet there was a genial shadowing forth of all those dinners and the progress of their cooking in the thawed blotch of wet above each baker's oven, where the pavement smoked as if its stones were cooking too. Is there a peculiar flavor in what you sprinkle upon your torch? Asked Scrooge. There is, my own. Would it apply to any kind of dinner on this day? Asked Scrooge. To any kindly given, to a poor one most. Why to a poor one most? Asked Scrooge. Because it needs it most. Spirit, said Scrooge after a moment's thought, I wonder you, of all the beings in the world, in the many worlds about us, should desire to cramp these people's opportunities of innocent enjoyment. I, cried the spirit, you would deprive them of their means of dining every seventh day, often the only day on which they can be said to dine at all, said Scrooge, wouldn't you? I, cried the spirit. You seek to close these places on the seventh day, said Scrooge, and it comes to the same thing. I seek, exclaimed the spirit. Forgive me if I am wrong, but it is done in your name, or at least in that of your family, said Scrooge. There are some upon this earth of yours, returned the spirit, who lay claim to know us, and who do their deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our names, who are as strange to us and all our kith and kin as if they had never lived. Remember that, and charge their doings to themselves, not on us. Scrooge promised that he would, and they went on, invisible, as they had been before, into the suburbs of the town. And I think that's where I'm supposed to stop.
No, keep going. It's wonderful.
Oh. I thought I stopped there.
Okay, that's fine. No.
I mean, I can keep going, but that's all right. I was wondering if I should stop and talk. This is just because I'm thinking a lot of kids nowadays don't understand the seventh day.
Oh, please. Yes. What does it mean?
Well, when you're talking about the seventh day, it used to be the seventh day being Sunday, the day of worship. And it used to be that nothing was ever open on Sunday. You just couldn't get anything on Sunday. Everything was closed. It was a day of rest. Everything was rest. So that it's so interesting that it's pointed out that, he's saying that, well, in your name, supposedly people can't get food and things on Sunday because everything's closed. Scrooge is saying your people, as if to say God, that the church is telling people that things have to be closed because the Lord wants you to rest. And the spirit's going like, I never said that. And then he says, you people have done it. Forgive, you're doing it with all your hatred and all those things. That's man doing it. It's not the gods doing it. I love it when he says, who lay claim to know us and who do their deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our name. But that's not who we are, which I think is so wonderful.
Yes.
And there's this little moral lesson put into this every now, he sticks these little things in here that you're just not expecting to when you're reading a book. Or when you think of all the times you've heard the story of the Christmas Carol, or it's been a Disney cartoon, or it's been this or that. All this is gone when they show you that. You miss all this.